So here's the news. I had COVID. I'm virtually certain I had COVID because I had symptoms that match COVID so darn well. I had the sore throat. I had the runny nose. I had a bit of sneezing. I treated it aggressively. I used ivermectin. I used hydroxychloroquine prescribed by a doctor, both of them. And the experience.
And all the usual over-the-counter stuff that we are now doing, which we have talked about before.
I continued
D and C and zinc and quercetin and magnesium, and also during that time, NAC and black seed oil.
Yeah. So presumably I was pretty well equipped D-wise, ionophore-wise. All those things were in order. And the experience of COVID was incredibly mild for me. And it went on for about 5 days. It was odd in the sense that it basically felt like a light head cold. And it was different from a light head cold in my experience in the sense that it didn't really change. It was like I had the initial thing of like, am I about to get sick? And then I did get sick. And then it kind of hovered at that level for 5 annoying days. And then it cleared up. And actually on the 4th day, I got fed up with it. It wasn't any different than it had been on the previous days. And I decided to see if I could ride my bike. And actually I detected no difference in my ability to climb hills and all of that. So it was a very mild, somewhat annoying experience. It's a little bizarre because
you didn't expose yourself to anyone except the people you lived with.
Right.
Who had already had it.
Mm-hmm. And it was annoying to have something that felt like a cold and not do the things. Now, personally, I've been saying for much longer than there's been COVID that I don't think we treat things like colds with proper seriousness, that we give each other colds too easily because society sort of doesn't expect you to stay away. But in any case, it was frustrating not to be able to do things like run to the market to get something when I had what felt like an extremely light cold. On the other hand, not my choice to make for other people who might contract it, so I did do it. But anyway, the experience after 2 years of dodging this virus, and obviously I probably had Omicron, which is clearly a different experience than Delta and other previous variants, but it is interesting after 2 years of, I believe, successfully dodging COVID to finally have it catch up to me and have that experience be what it was. This also means that, as you mentioned, all of the family has now had COVID. We're almost certain of this because the symptoms are such a close match. I will say, you brought home 4. You happened to be at a drugstore when someone happened to make a delivery of these at-home tests. And you brought home 4, which was the limit of what they would sell you. Each box contains 2 tests. We gave them at various places.
We can talk about this, I guess, but I think I would never have sought out these tests. I happened to be, as I wrote about in my Substack, I happened to be standing in line at the point that they showed up, and all these people came spilling into the store having been waiting for these things. And the guy in front of me and me in line just happened to be sort of, quote unquote, in the right place at the right time. And frankly, I bought them thinking, well, we'll save them for when we need them to prove, because we can't get into a lot of places here unless you have a negative test or proof of vaccination, and we don't have the latter. And they're garbage. They're total garbage, and I don't like that they exist, and so basically, I want nothing to do with this. I want nothing to do with the testing. I want nothing to do with being asked to prove that I took a test that we aren't even being told anymore what the rates of false negatives and false positives are. We aren't even being told like what the source on these things is, and frankly, the bigger point is this isn't a big deal anymore.
Well, but
this is no longer a disease. It's a big deal for most people. And, you could say that about a cold and no one's going to gasp and say you're killing people. And you could even say that about the flu, although most people wouldn't say it quite so strongly about the flu. And in the beginning, 2 years ago, 22 months ago, we were saying about and to people who were saying it's just a flu. Like, no, it's not. And it's not, it's different in part because it's been, it's a Frankenvirus. But at this point, With this variant, it is far less in terms of how it manifests.
Yeah, but I still want to make this point. Okay, 8 tests for 8 come up negative in a family in which the people who were tested were presumed positive in several cases
by doctors.
Okay,
Yep.
And so my point is, look, you and I
who also affirm that the tests are worthless.
Right. You and I are biologists, right? We are not lab biologists, but we have certainly done lab work, right? So we are going to be well above average in our ability to do the test as the protocol.
It wasn't a failure to swab.
Right. It wasn't a failure at any level. And if we did the test in such a way that it did not come up positive 8 times out of 8 because of something in the technique, then it is a flawed test at that level. And if the test is simply so insensitive that it can't measure these things, how is it possible that we're 2 years into these things, that we're distributing these tests without information about how seriously to take their results when the tests appear to be nonsense? Second thing is, I don't know whether the lightness of the disease that we faced was entirely a fact of Omicron, whether it was because we have been very diligent now that we understand the role that things like vitamin D deficiency and ionophore deficiency play to supplement these things. We are extremely careful about this, so we were well prepared. But the point is,
or the early treatment,
or all of the above. And the point is, why is the CDC not recommending the supplementation? Why are we distributing tests that give a completely false impression, to the extent that knowledge about whether you are or aren't positive could be useful in terms of controlling the spread of the disease, if that's even what we should be attempting to do with Omicron, right? Why is the experience of this so far off of the official recommendation, right? Why? And this is really the crux of the matter is. And by the way, if you want to know what light looked like,
in every regard, the data stream is polluted. In every regard.
Single regard. There's nothing that you can
glean.
There's
no ability to, there's no place you can stand and be like, okay, I'm limited when I can see. There's some columns I have to look around, but at least I know from here what I can see about the official counts or anything. You can't trust any of it.
The officials are blinding themselves, right? We can talk all day about, adverse events, but the point is, they tell us that we can't trust the data. They don't tell us what we're supposed to infer the level of adverse events from other than the data in the VAERS system. They aren't doing autopsies, which would be the way if you were really interested in finding out whether people who had died in some temporal proximity to a vaccination had died from it, or just it was a spurious temporal correlation, but we're not collecting the data. So anyway, the data stream is polluted all over the place. But the tell for me, the tell is what happened at the point that Omicron seems to have caught them and everyone else off guard, right? At the point that a variant shows up, which, as many of us pointed out, has many of the characteristics that you would ascribe to an attenuated virus vaccine.
As a woman I know said to me this week, who does not particularly follow the podcast or anything, isn't Omicron what we all wanted? Isn't that what the world was hoping for back in the first year of COVID?
I will make my usual caution, right? Attenuated virus vaccines are the best vaccines from the point of view of their interaction with the system. That is to say, they properly alert the body to the antigens that the body becomes sensitive to, because they are actual infections, right? And so the point is, your body knows how to detect an infection. It detects the infection from the attenuated virus. It has the proper reaction. It makes a durable, lasting immunity, right? That's what you want. It has a slight danger to it, which is that because you're using an actual living organism, right? Organism is, I'm using the term loosely, but
living, right?
But nonetheless, the point is, you're talking about something that has genetic information in it and evolves. And basically, I would argue it is a living organism. It just borrows all of the machinery from you. But let's put that aside. It's not important to the question. You're talking about something that can evolve, right? Now, it's very unlikely to evolve because of one thing, right? The one thing is that the attenuated virus vaccine that we give you is not contagious, which means it has a very limited window in which to learn new tricks that might be dangerous to you, right? And so the point is, even if it makes slight progress on that question, if it doesn't jump to the next person, that whatever progress it makes is lost, okay? Omicron is not like this, even though it has many of the characteristics of attenuated virus vaccines. it lacks some of them. It's not as attenuated as you would want, right? An attenuated virus vaccine that's really great will have effectively no symptoms. This one has symptoms.
And it's highly contagious.
It's highly contagious, which means that what evolves from Omicron, it could be more attenuated than Omicron. That's one strong possibility, but it's not the only possibility. And so, yes, the universe having delivered Omicron to us at this moment, we ought to look at it and say, you know what? That is functioning like a vaccine, and we ought to pivot our policy on that basis, right? We ought not say, hey, a vaccine, because it has this evolving capacity to it.
This policy pivoting you speak of.
Which is the amazing fact here.
Yes.
Nothing changed, right? It was like you could tell, right? Were they going to have a meeting and say, well, in light of Omicron, does this booster stuff make any sense? Geez, we don't, if they're being honest with themselves and what they say to us has anything to do with what they say to themselves, which is clearly not the case. But if it did, they would say something like, we don't have any idea what the adverse events are from here because we don't trust VAERS and there's no other system to collect them, right? Maybe we shouldn't be advising boosters.
This from the Oregon Health Authority. Tell us how your friends and family helped you through COVID-19. You have been in bed for 2 days with a sore throat and fever. You hoped it was just a regular head cold, but as symptoms persist, you recognize the inevitable and get a test. It's COVID-19. Your friends and family are concerned and want to help. What do you need? Groceries? Someone to help with childcare? Someone to run to the pharmacy for you or walk the dog? So they're soliciting stories. You've had a sore throat and fever. You have something in the general scheme of a cold or maybe even a flu, depending on the variant, this sort of thing. You recognize the inevitable. They are trying to keep us so scared of one thing and only one thing. And this, this again, to your point, and this is why I wanted to interject this many minutes ago, to your point about the narrative will not shift. Imagine soliciting stories about the cold. You recognize the inevitable. You're going to be not feeling up to walking your dog for a couple of days. What do you do?
Right. It's actually, they've loaded you up with a concern. And then the point is, even if what you should be experiencing is, this is an annoyance rather than a life-threatening condition, the point is they're going to now collect on having loaded you up with that fear, right?
Right.
And they're going to, instead of letting you calibrate how to feel about how sick you are, they're going to tell you how to feel. And that is, you should feel frightened. And,
right. Yes.
That's the other thing that needs to be said here is, what we experienced with COVID was super mild. If people want to know what that looked like, frankly, I did a joint live stream with Chris Martinson, an experiment that we did where we streamed to our 2 channels. I was sick. Before we went on camera, I mentioned this to Chris and he said, I hear it in your voice. So you can go there and you can hear it, right? You can see exactly what it looked like and how debilitating it was. I will say, of all of us, Toby actually defeated the thing in, less than 24 hours of, sniffles and sneezes.
Yeah, we couldn't send him to school, so he went on a bike ride.
Right. I mean, but
it was exactly the same, the sore throat, all exactly the same symptoms, and none of us got new things from the other as it just progressed through the family.
Right. And
so we all had the same thing.
If you didn't have a, nightmare of a public health authority out there, we would be having a very different conversation. And the conversation would sound like, okay, Omicron is sweeping through the population. It is folly to think that we can control it, right? This is so contagious that it's uncontrollable. We ought to protect those who are vulnerable, and there is presumably an age stratification in the danger of this thing. So I may have had something that felt like a mild cold. An 85-year-old might have something very different. We should protect people from it, even though
it's not that people can't die from this.
Right. But, the fact is the nature of death is such that you become fragile and more vulnerable to it. And at some point, you're so vulnerable that nearly anything can push you over. So turning society upside down doesn't make any sense. So the right conversation to be having is, in light of Omicron, the policy ought to radically shift in the direction of, we can't control this. We should protect the vulnerable. We should go back. We should rescue our economy to the extent that we can still do it. We should address our supply chain issues. And if something evolves from this that has some different pattern, we'll get back to you. We'll look at that one then, and we'll say, what does it suggest that we should be doing? But of course, we're not having that discussion, and that tells you everything you need to know.